Hi, good afternoon. Can I get everyone's attention, please, and we'll get this show on the road. Thank you. I'm Philip Crawley. I'm the publisher and CEO of the Globe and Mail, and welcome to the Globe and Mail Event Centre. And it's very nice to be using this space in the way it was intended after a couple of years, having a lot of people in here, which is great. I've only been able to do this in the last couple of weeks, and obviously lots more joining us, an audience right across Canada joining virtually, but live events back again, thank goodness. Before I begin, let's acknowledge the land on which the Globe and Mail headquarters is situated. It's the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. So the subject today, unlocking our potential and the impact of immigration, that's a very important topic. It's certainly, from our point of view at the Globe, about 25% of our staff are on the data science, digital. It's the innovation in our business is coming how we apply data science to the delivery of content and to the sale of subscriptions. So that's a very important area, and we're fortunate in that we're able to recruit from a talent pool that's much richer as a result of what's been happening, particularly in Toronto, in terms of the talent that's available in this community coming in, particularly to this area for to work in the tech field, and we have lots of jobs going in that area. I'd like to thank the Century Initiative. This is a partnership which we've been growing for the last couple of years. And we're very pleased to be able to work with you today. We've got a very strong lineup of speakers, some of the best business voices, experts in Canada speaking today. I looked at one of the reports that was produced by the BDC a couple of years ago and said immigrants are much more likely to start business compared to the Canadian born population. So the spirit of entrepreneurship, I hope, is continuing to survive the impacts of COVID. The way we can create a more supportive and inclusive ecosystem for newcomers, for entrepreneurs, obviously very key to the success of a lot of businesses. I'd like to recognize Century Initiative as an event partner, and also thank 369 Connect for their support of today's event, so thank you. We have a number of Globe and Mail journalists here. We've been hiring more journalists for Report on Business. We don't need to wait for government money to do that, like some others. It's very important that we keep on investing in our journalism, and we've got a bit of a stellar cast here. James Bradshaw, our banking reporter, you'll be hearing from soon. He did a very important piece last Saturday in the Globe on the relationship between, if you like, big business in Canada and the federal government, and highly relevant to tomorrow's budget, which James will be involved in covering. We also have Rita Tricker, a senior business writer and columnist. She writes a very trenchant column in the ROB. Chris Hannay on independent business. Dawn Calais, who's editor of Report on Business magazine, which, despite the woes of the magazine industry, continues to do very well. And a new technology reporter we just hired, Tema Durrani. So all of those people are in the room or contributing this afternoon. I'm now going to introduce Lisa Lalonde, CEO of the Century Initiative. They're launching a new national scorecard on Canada's growth and prosperity today. It tracks how Canada is performing in key areas related to our future prosperity. So please join me in welcoming Lisa to the stage, and thank you all for your participation today. I hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and the warm welcome, Philip. I also want to thank the Globe and Mail for hosting this important discussion, and of course our partners, our sponsors, None of this would be possible without your generous support. So you don't need me to tell you that today's world is a turbulent and challenging place. All of us are rightfully preoccupied with the war in the Ukraine, with the effects of climate change, with economic turmoil, and with the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as dire as these issues are, I believe that there is hope and opportunity ahead. I think it's safe to assume that this is one of the reasons that we're all here today, because we're optimistic, because we believe a better, bolder future in Canada is possible. That belief is fundamental to who and what Century Initiative is all about. We're a network of Canadians from the business, academic, and charitable sectors who share the belief that with the right approach to growing our population, we can enhance Canada's economic strength and resilience at home, and also our influence abroad. But achieving these objectives takes planning and it takes focus. Hope, as they say, is not a strategy. So just over a year ago at a similar Globe and Mail event, we launched our first ever national scorecard on Canada's growth and prosperity. It was and still is the only comprehensive snapshot available to policy and decision makers of Canada's progress toward a bigger, bolder, more prosperous future. This year's edition is being released today, and it shows that we have many reasons to be optimistic about our country's economic future. For instance, it shows that Canada remains a destination of choice for entrepreneurial and skilled immigrants worldwide. As various panelists and speakers will discuss today, this is good for population growth and good for the innovation economy. Immigrants are risk takers who have chosen to come to Canada as the place to call home. They decided to roll the dice on building a new life in a new place to find new opportunities. This is great news for Canada and something that we can build on as a country. But because our scorecard is the most holistic view of the factors that contribute to smart growth, we also know that there are areas where we have work to do, areas that need attention or simply where we're falling behind as a country. At Century Initiative, our job is to educate and advocate for the policies needed to drive the country forward toward the goal of a bigger, bolder, more prosperous Canada. Achieving that means growing our population through a smart, sustainable approach to immigration. Today's event is an important part of that effort. Simply put, there are two futures open to Canada. In the first, we stay our present course and current demographic trends continue to erode our economic potential. That is a future of decline, of an aging population, strained budgets, waning global influence, and diminishing standards of living. But the second future is one of growth, where Canada matters, where entrepreneurial and ambitious Canadians help us to command the economic and diplomatic heft we need to advance our interests on the global stage and defend our values at home and abroad. A bolder Canada tomorrow starts with bold policy moves today, and our meeting this afternoon is an important contribution to this discussion. I look forward to it, and I thank all of you for participating today and for your commitment to a bigger, bolder, more influential Canada. Thank you. And before I leave the stage, I would like to welcome up James Bradshaw, who will actually be leading the next interview.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. As Lisa said, I'm James Bradshaw. I'm the banking reporter here at the Globe and Mail. I want to really welcome you all here. It's wonderful to have a buzz in the building. The newsroom's been quiet for way too long here. And I'm really delighted to be the person who gets the privilege of moderating our first discussion today. Over the course of this afternoon, we'll have conversations with entrepreneurs and business leaders, immigration and innovation experts who will map out a vision for Canada with regard to growth and prosperity. Just some housekeeping as we go along. We'll likely have time for an audience question here and there. So if you're in the room, please give us a wave and we'll bring a microphone over to you so you can ask it. For those of you in the virtual audience, please type your questions and our staff will read them out for you. It's my pleasure now to be sitting down for a conversation with someone who's really rapidly becoming one of Canada's most notable business leaders. She's an immigrant herself, and throughout her career, she's worked to support newcomers to Canada and help them find their place in our economy. She was appointed as President and Chief Executive Officer of Laurentian Bank in 2020. I was saying to her earlier, she's a true pandemic CEO, all virtual. And she was the first woman to head a major Canadian chartered bank, which was quite a milestone. As a transformational change leader, her top priority is building high-performance teams and creating a culture of equality, diversity, and inclusion, which is right on topic of what we want to talk about today. So please join me in welcoming to the stage, excuse me, Rania Llewellyn. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us here today. I think it's great to have a chance to talk to you about this. First and foremost, just because this is a topic you come to very honestly because you've lived through it. You're an immigrant to Canada yourself. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you told me you arrived here when you were about 16 years old with your family. And I thought that's probably a good place to start. Can you tell us a little bit about your story, your arrival here, and what you and your family faced when you got to Canada?
Yeah, no, that's great. It's really weird actually being in front of a real audience and dressing up for this event. But anyway, nice to see you again, James. So my family and I was born in Kuwait, and my dad was an expat there. We moved to Egypt because that's when you're born there, you take your dad's citizenship. And then my mom's from Jordan, and so at one point after the Gulf War, we decided, you know what, we needed a safer place to grow up and just. I had an older brother and a younger sister. And so we actually all sat down as a family, and I'm sure many of you are immigrants, had the same conversations and said, okay, where do we go? And the two choices we were looking at were Australia or Canada. Had we thought about the weather, we would have never have landed in Canada. It's true. And so then we decided, let's come to Canada. And so we landed on August 21st, 1992, in Halifax, Nova Scotia, of all places. Because when my dad hired an immigration consultant, you had different ways of coming into the country, and I think that's part of the education that people need to understand.
Right. He
came in as an entrepreneur, and which is very different, which means you have to come in, you have to invest money and open a business rather than a professional or other forms of immigrants. And so when we landed in Halifax. I went straight to university because I was at the American University in Cairo. And so, you're excited. Your parents have taken massive risks. Like, I think of my parents when they came to this country. They came at my age. They gave up everything they knew, right? Coming to a country they didn't know a single soul and having to start all over again. My dad was not a business guy. My dad was a mechanical engineer.
Right.
And so, the way it works for kids of that generation is then you say, okay, they've given up everything. We're going to make it. We're going to make it in this country. So I was really excited when I graduated. I had a Bachelor of Commerce from St. Mary's University in business, in marketing and finance. And as you can see, I don't have an accent. And I can belong from any country. But yet when I started applying for jobs, I couldn't even get an interview. Right? My name was not Llewellyn at the time. It was Rania Zakaria Gindi El Komos, which is a full, a hard name to pronounce. And I couldn't get an interview. And I used to always say, if I could just get that interview and I just need that foot in the door. And so, typical immigrants, what do? We go back and get more education because that's what tends to happen.
Right.
And so I went back and I started doing my MBA. And I was fortunate enough, I did meet somebody, my dad's banker at the time, met me and said, we're looking for a teller. And I said, great, I'll start as a teller while I'm doing my master's. And so when I was finishing my master's, I was also excited. I was like, okay, now I've got the foot in the door. That bank should give me a job. Well, I started applying, and I applied with one of my colleagues who had the same credentials, but a different name. He gets an interview, and I don't get an interview. And so it was really hard pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And had I not, so at our swearing-in ceremony to be new Canadians, we had a senior vice president from the bank at the time, and he basically, my mom told me, you go and ask him for a job. Had this man not given me 10 minutes of his time, I wouldn't have been able to get into the commercial account management program. And so that's kind of the beginning of just getting your foot in the door. And then, to be honest, when I met my husband and he said, "I'd really like you to take my name." I said, "Yeah, sure, I'm taking your name." And I got to tell you, nobody has asked me where I come from ever again. They're like, "Oh, are you Welsh?
Is that right?
Are you Welsh?" And I'm like, "No, actually, that's my married name.
Right.
Let me tell you about my first name." And so that's just the first obstacle immigrants have. The next one is, once you go in, the diversity is the easy part, it's the inclusion part. Now, what I would say, James, is so I may look like I was born and raised here, I was educated here, but if you were raised in your early years somewhere else and in a very different cultural background, the way your mind, how you think, how you communicate is very, very different.
Yeah.
And I actually found it very challenging early on in terms of, you're too aggressive, you're too assertive, you're too outspoken, you're too creative, you're too this, you're too that. And I couldn't understand why until you start peeling that onion and saying, you know what, we are all products of our environment. And so all the experiences, all the lived experiences you've had shape you into the leader that you are, the communicator that you are, the human being that you are, and how you contribute to communities. But unless you're aware of those differences, it's hard to actually make an impact.
Yeah. That's really interesting, because part of what you've sort of outlined so far is, one, how much getting an opportunity depended on really informal and sort of fortuitous things, like meeting the right person at the right time, and also how much this is about what you might think of as softer factors, right? Cultural factors, things about your name, the way you behave with people in social situations, things like that. And I'm interested to be up here as well, because although it may not seem like it, I'm an immigrant to Canada too. I came here when I was a young boy. Probably a different experience, probably a much more fortunate experience. My father came here for a very specialized job. He was a conductor for an opera company, and we were, coming from the US, we were white and Western and English speaking, and didn't probably face the same barriers. But when you think about the barriers people do face when they come here, how much of that at this point do you think is those sort of softer, less tangible factors, and how much is it harder things like accreditation and formal support services? When you think your father being an engineer, whether that was recognized when he got here, how much of it is the softer things, and how much of them are more formal barriers?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I know Philip was talking about how more immigrants tend to be more entrepreneurs. What ends up happening is they weren't necessarily entrepreneurs in their own country, but they come here and they can't find a job, so they're like, you know what? I got to make a living, and so all of a sudden they build their own businesses and they become extremely successful. So what I would say, it's not the hard skills, because to get into Canada, you need to qualify, and you get the point system, and then you're brought here, and then you're left to your own. There are certain places to go to, but they're not as easily accessible. And so, as I said, what a lot of people do then is they go back to university and say, well, maybe I need a Canadian degree or some sort of Canadian certification. And then you start applying for job, and then you're overqualified because you don't have Canadian experience. And so it's a vicious cycle that tends to happen. Yeah. And so it's getting that first opportunity. And that's one thing that, like I joined Laurentian Bank a year and a half ago, and I did lots of roundtable conversations with our staff, and I was pleasantly surprised. One thing we do, for example, is we don't, in any of our job descriptions, we don't ask for a previous Canadian experience. So all of a sudden, you're removing a very important barrier, right?
Yeah.
And so over 37% of our employees are actually they're immigrants. They're first-generation immigrants, which is pretty significant,
that high? Wow.
Right? And these are like visible minorities who have actually identified as that. And so I would say it's these little things that, there are a lot of systemic barriers, and people don't know that. But that's only getting that first job. And then what do you do when you're in the job? And so a lot of people are overqualified for the roles that they initially get in Canada, right? And so then how do you move them up and make sure that, because that's the only way Canada is going to grow, right? We heard about immigration, the immigration numbers. We need growth in this country, and so we do a lot of work qualifying them up front, but what we need to do a better job as Canadians is to actually integrate them faster into society so that they can contribute to the growth of the economy.
Yeah, and recognize the skills they have and make the most of them. So let's expand a little bit on, it seems like companies, and particularly larger employers like a bank, have a big role to play in this, because if they give opportunities, that first opportunity to people, if they have meaningful pathways to move forward, they can be a bit of that community that helps people acclimatize and advance, I would think. You've talked a little bit about, that's a great example of not having previous Canadian experience as a requirement on resumes. Tell me a little bit more about, for an organization as large as yours, with as much scope as yours, employees in different cities, in different types of banking, in a whole array of different roles, technology roles too. How do you begin to make it a more welcoming place to new immigrants? What's the roadmap for you for that as a business leader?
Yeah, so the way I look at it is, in terms of managing talent, there are three really important steps. There's the attraction component, so making sure you can acquire them. So whether it's diverse panels, making sure we're posting the jobs appropriately, we're removing some of the barriers, not focusing on people's names or where they actually got their experiences, but their actual experiences. And then when they're being interviewed, to make sure that they have a diverse panel of interviewees. And then once you get them in, it's how do you create that inclusive environment? Because until the majority of the leaders change, right? So you need to start with that, because they're the ones that are assessing the talent. They're the ones that are promoting the talent. They're the ones that are developing the talent. So we need to train them. Plus, we need to also take chances and make sure that we're actually promoting people quickly into some of the roles. And so I joined Laurentian a year and a half ago, and this has been something that's been near and dear to my heart. I've been in the banking industry for 26 years, and I've probably led a lot of the ED&I initiatives without having to formalize it. And so unconscious bias training is mandatory at Laurentian Bank, and we made it mandatory for our board, right? Because until you're aware of and we all have biases. Listen, I'm Middle Eastern, I got my own biases, right? We all have our biases. And so it's really important to be aware of them so that, you're conscious of it rather than being unconscious. That's number one. Number two is creating a very safe environment, because I think what's happened in society now, and I think it started with the We movement, and there's been lots of other, is that people are afraid to insult someone or to start a conversation, that you may use the wrong terminology and I'll give you an example. So, a few years ago when I was actually tapped, someone came to me and said, we'd like you to be the executive sponsor for the Black Employee Network. And I said, can I use the word black?
Right.
And they're like, absolutely. So all of a sudden, I felt empowered that it's okay for me to use that word, right? Because they allowed me to use the word. And so how do you create those safe environment that people don't get defensive for minority groups, but then the leaders are comfortable? And so we started this discussion under an umbrella called Courageous Conversation Series, because it does take a lot of courage, but it starts from a place of, I'd like to understand better. I'd like to learn more, right? And so let's have these conversations. And so it started, so we launched it last year, and then we encouraged employees to create their own employee resource groups that are sponsored by an executive. So the first one we did was for the Black employee group at Laurentian Bank. And it was interesting, because when they first came to me, they said, the employee resource group, they have to all, they're going to be Black, and then we're going to have one in Toronto, we're going to have one in Montreal. And I said, well, how is that inclusive? Right? You guys are already Black. You know that. So how are you going to make sure that everyone is included in that conversation and they're going to learn more about the challenges that you've had? And so I think it's really important to kind of help drive that. And then we have an executive sponsor that reports directly into me, right? So it's creating that safe place. The other thing too is, listen, I run a bank, right? What doesn't get measured doesn't get done, right? And so putting hard metrics in place was really important. And so we started with scorecards at the executive level to say, okay, what's our target for female leaders? What's our target for BIPOC? What's our target for students that we're hiring? And just like we report the financial statements to our board every quarter, those numbers are in there as well, right? Because I'm like, if it's good, to make a real difference. And so it's part of their scorecard.
Yeah.
Right? And now we're rolling it down further into, more junior leadership roles as well.
Yeah. And I've seen you speak, I've seen your strategy, and you've set a very clear tone at the top about this. As you say, the scorecard is a measurable accountability mechanism. Is there further work you've got to do as a leader and your senior leadership team have to do as leaders to make sure day after day people are treating this as a real thing, and that it's not a score to get on a scorecard, but something that they need to sort of live with people in a human way every day?
Yeah.
How do you go about that part of it?
You know what? I mean, James, this is an ongoing journey. Like I said, we all have our unconscious biases, but it's simple. I mean, my leaders know now if they're putting forward a name, Rania is going to give me a call if it's a man's name, and if it's a Caucasian name. Like that, so now at least they know, and so it's making them think long and hard about where am I going to fish for talent, right?
Okay.
Because all of our connections are usually based on, the groups that we hang out with. And so that's really important is, how are we expanding that network? And so making sure that everybody knows they're going to be held accountable to it and setting the tone from the top is absolutely critical. So they all know when they're, putting forward the names forward in terms of, okay, we'd like to, appoint this new executive. Here's the process, here was the panel, here's the number of names that were put forward. The other thing too that we've started doing is to live and breathe it is, so we launched our 5-point strategy, as you know, James. And so one of our strategies is called Make the Better Choice, and one of our key core values is everyone belongs here at Laurentian Bank. In making the better choice, what we deliberately said is, as we're engaging with new partners and new vendors and new fintechs, we've built that into our process as well. Mm-hmm. So our very first partnership that we announced is an immigrant. She's from the Middle East. She's a woman. She started this fintech years ago, and so we're extremely proud to partner up with her as well. That doesn't mean that we're not going to partner up with others, but it's a great success story in terms of how we're also living these core values. And so it's not just in terms of our employees, but it's also our partners. I just hired a new chief legal counsel that reports directly into me, and we're having those conversations with the legal firms. You guys talk about ED&I. When I meet with the partners, the relationship managers that are covering us, where's the female?
Right.
Where's the minority groups that are being represented? Let's make sure we're giving them opportunities as well. And so there's different ways to hold people accountable, but we still all have a lot of work to do ahead of us.
And you made an interesting point when you talked about getting people to think differently about where they look for talent. So let's zoom the lens out a little bit and talk about what this means for the economy in Canada. We know economic challenges to growth, to productivity. We have labor challenges, which seems to be something that has shot to the top of the agendas of a lot of CEOs of late, with fierce competition for certain types of talent, particularly in areas like technology, but also shortages across the economy in things like service jobs. How do we begin to attack this as a problem or with solutions that can make sure that the immigration that we're getting, which is substantial, we're bringing in hundreds of thousands of people a year, is making the largest contribution it can to our economic growth and prosperity that we can?
Yeah, I think accreditation and getting them fast into roles that they've been, if you can almost pre-qualify them before they come here. I mean, we have a shortage of nurses, we have a shortage, listen, I'm Coptic Orthodox. If you come to any Coptic Orthodox church, the majority of them are either doctors or pharmacists, right? But many of them have never even practiced it, being a doctor here, because it's like, I can't go back and re-accredit myself into being a physician, right? So I think that's what we need to do better is there a way for us to start that process earlier so that when they arrive, they're immediately contributing to the economy, which is exactly what they want to do. And that's going to drive, in terms of growth of spending. It's going to help in terms of all of our labor shortages. We're going to need some more housing. We've got a shortage of housing supply. But collectively, I mean, immigrants are definitely one of our biggest solutions there. And so we just need to be able to remove some of those barriers. So, private companies can definitely help, absolutely. But the government should be able to help as well in terms of how do we speed up the accreditation process.
Yeah, I think accreditation is a big one. When we have sort of councils of leading thinkers who try to attack this issue, accreditation comes up a lot. You mentioned also the experience of, you go through the checklist to get into Canada, and then you are largely on your own, and the networks you find more informally. Is there a role for greater formal support services to help people through this, to help them add a skill they may be missing from that resume if they really need it? Is that somewhere where both government and businesses could make some investments and make a difference?
Yeah, you know what? Absolutely. I think if, just like any file, if someone arrives and someone is assigned to them in terms of here's how we're going to help you out in terms of getting your kids settled, helping you do your resume and so on. All of these facilities are available. It's just directing them in the right place. And so, yeah, I think there may be interesting creative opportunities for the government as well as the private sector to step in on that front as well.
Okay. And I think, in Canada, we like to think of ourselves as a place that is very welcoming to immigrants. We like to think of ourselves as a country that maybe does better than some at this. But to you, what's the glaring problem that we still have with the way we handle our immigration? What's the flashing red light on the dashboard for you? What would you like to see leaders in Canada wake up and do better on?
I think to solve a problem, you need to first admit that you have a problem or an issue, right? Because I openly tell people, I actually never saw color until I came to Canada. Where I came from, it was based on religion, right? But people are extremely polite, and so they're very different. I guess where I came from, it's very different culturally in terms of you kind of say what you want to say, and it's pretty direct. And so I think it's really important for us to start by saying, what do I know, what do I not know? Do I understand the problem, and how am I going to actually help fix it?
Yeah.
And so I think that's one thing that we all need to do better at, because I think, being in denial that we don't have an issue or we do a good job and we welcome all those people, but not understanding their stories and giving them a voice, that's the only way we're going to learn in terms of, there are real challenges out there, and they've given up so much to come to this beautiful country. I mean, I'm fortunate to call Canada home, and I'm one of its biggest ambassadors in terms of we live in a very safe country. We're very blessed by a lot of things, despite the weather. But I think it's really important to give those immigrants a voice in terms of, here are the challenges we've gone through, and this is what we've been able to accomplish, and let's figure out how we can solve for the immigration opportunity and make sure that we're setting Canada up for growth. Because I truly believe, different mindset, diverse experiences, that's the only way we're going to innovate and win, right? I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. Like when I first came to Canada, listen, in Egypt, to get like a landline, you'd be on a waiting list for like 2-3 years because of the infrastructure, right? I went back and visited 8 years later. People had more cell phones than anyone I had seen here in Canada. I had just gotten, I think, my first BlackBerry. And so that was because they had a barrier, and guess what? They were able to leapfrog everything, forget about the infrastructure, we're gonna go straight to getting mobile phones. And so that's what we need. We need people who come from very different backgrounds, who have a different mindset, to help us continue to innovate and to propel us in terms of, on a more global scale, being a more competitive country. Because we have all of the components of it, we just need to make sure that we're bringing it all together.
That's a really good point too, just about the sort of entrepreneurial and innovative mindset that you can get from that. I'll just ask you as one more question. I mean, to have you having conversations like this from the role you're in, I think is powerful, and it sets an example, and it sends a message to people who are new to Canada that there is a pathway to really serious success. We certainly still have challenges with getting enough diversity at the board and senior executive levels in Canada. And we have challenges, I think, equally with people who are part of that diverse community because they're immigrants to Canada. But there are senior leaders increasingly in those roles. What's your message to them? How can people who have that platform, who have shown the path to success, do more to help chart the way for others? What would you like to see your fellow leaders in the corporate sector, who may be newcomers to Canada as well, relatively speaking, what more can they do?
I think everybody has a role to play. Our allies have a bigger role to play because they're in more powerful positions than the immigrants, right? So if you actually look at most of the CEO, like just in terms of the exco tables, or I think we've made progress, but again, we're kidding ourselves if we've said we made great progress.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that's the thing. We have to hold ourselves accountable. Our shareholders need to hold us accountable. So I think we just need to work and drive harder. And again, I go back to metrics, right? So we've recently just put metrics in our board, at our board level, even though we were at 55%. Actually, Laurentian Bank was the first bank to have a female CEO chair. In all of Canada, right? And so that was one of the things that attracted me to the institution as well. And so check. I got to tell you, when I was recruiting as well, it was hard for me. Like I was recruiting, I was putting out, like I wanted to have even a more diverse exco team. And it was surprising how few people actually put their names forward, whether it be women or diverse people. But I worked exceptionally hard to try to make it as diverse as possible. But we're not stopping there. And so I think it's really important, again, it goes back to, yes, we've made progress, but is it enough? And I don't believe it's enough.
Yeah, that's a great point, that we need allies across the sector, across the business world. And if everybody has set targets to measure it, then hopefully everybody is held accountable to get something done. I could talk to you about this all day, but we have a lot on tap, so I'm going to hand over the stage. I want to really thank you for coming and talking to us. We appreciate it a lot. It's been fascinating. And I'm going to hand off now to my colleague Rita Treacher, who's going to moderate our next session for us. Thanks so much, Rania.
Thanks, James. Thank you.
everyone. I'm Rita Twitcher. I'm a senior business writer and columnist here at the Globe and Mail, and I am very pleased to be moderating our next discussion. I would like to introduce our next two speakers. These two gentlemen don't need any introduction, actually. Mark Wiseman, he wears many hats, but he's chair of the board with Century Initiative, and he's speaking to us in that capacity today. And Goldie Hyder, president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Welcome, Mark and Goldie. Have a seat. Okay, so let's jump right into questions because we don't have a lot of time. Mark, I want to start with you. We recently published a piece that you wrote, a great opinion piece, and of course tomorrow is federal budget day, and we have seen some action from the government about temporary foreign workers, but I want to talk to you about the labor shortages because businesses across all sectors are grappling at the moment with this labor shortage. And what are your views on that issue and the potential role of immigration as a solution?
Well, thanks, Rita. I'm delighted to be here, and I think these are incredibly important topics. I'm also delighted to be here because we're here in 3D, some of us without masks on even. So it's nice to be back together. But I want to start, I know we all hate talking about it, but I want to start with COVID. Because in many respects, we've been talking about demographic trends. We've been talking about the war for talent, the issues around labor shortages for a long time. And the incredible thing about demographics is that they're incredibly predictable. If you know how many babies were born in 1990, you know how many 32-year-olds you have today, right? And you actually know that for 32 years. You can see that coming down the track. And so we know in this country, and as the former CEO of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board, we paid a lot of attention to this. We've known what the demographic trends are. We know that the dependency ratio is coming down. We know that by the end of this decade, we are going to have somewhere around 25% of our population who is 65 years of age or older. And we know that that's going to continue. That's a known fact. What COVID has done has actually accelerated those demographic trends. And accelerated them in a way that's quite worrying, not just because we've had people die, very sadly, much more so in the U.S. It's a much bigger factor in the U.S. than here, thankfully for us. But we also have people who have exited the labor force. We've had people that have taken early retirement, and we've had lower levels of immigration. And so essentially what's happened is the demographic trends that we've all been talking about have suddenly been accelerated by about a decade because of this pandemic. And now we're in the throes of it. And we don't have as much time as we thought we had to deal with it. So the question is, how do we deal with it? Well, I can tell you, we're not going to solve our problem by increasing our fertility rate alone. By the way, that's a good part of the long-term solution, and we all know how to accomplish that.
COVID didn't help, by the way. We thought it would, but it didn't actually help the birth rate.
Well, it's actually that problem is going to come down the line. But we know that our birth rate is well below replacement rate in Canada and will continue to be so, the same as it is in most developed countries. And so the answer is, how are we going to best compete for talent to bolster, in particular, our workforce? And bolster our workforce not just to become productive members of society, to pay taxes, to contribute, but also to support that aging population. So the answer for us is really simple. We need more people. We need more young people. And in fact, we need them in all walks of life. We are short scientists and nurses and pilots and engineers, but we're also short unskilled labor. And so the bottom line is it actually doesn't matter. We know the facts that the solution to the labor shortages that many business leaders are facing in this country, big and small. I mean, I was in Collingwood, Ontario a couple of weeks ago speaking to the woman who runs the framing gallery in town. And she said, look, I just need someone who knows what a right angle is. Like that's the skill I'm looking for, and I'll take anybody who can understand what a right angle is. And so it's not just big business, it's small business as well. And it's not just in Toronto, it's in Fredericton and Halifax and Collingwood and Lethbridge where we have the same issue. Now the advantage we have in this country is we actually know how to solve this problem. We know how to solve it, we just have to get on it. And we have to get on it with speed and with operationalization. And my last comment, sorry, it's a long answer, is, you know, Rania was just up here talking about metrics and measurement. Let's hold our government accountable to exactly the same thing as it relates to policy matters, in particular immigration. We know what our policy is. Did we meet it? Who did we bring in? What's the backlog? How are we clearing the backlog? 1 million people today. We have labor shortages. We have 1 million people today in a backlog in our system for immigration that are not being processed. I have an idea. Let's let in 5,000 people, immediately hire them into the immigration department to figure out how to let in the remaining 995,000.
Could work. Could work.
Okay, great. You're a journalist.
Tour de
straight
force.
through,
He's got a hot
Mark.
act to follow.
I mean, you like give a really fulsome response. But I have to tell you both that here's a little secret. The women knew that the birth rate was not going to increase because of COVID. Women knew that. It's just the men didn't know that.
Correct.
So
The men were hopeful.
That didn't happen in the blackout, but anyways, we're digressing. Can I just pick up on what I'm hearing from our members that Mark's just talked about? So our business council has 170 or so CEOs, the largest companies in the country, about 2 million direct employees and stuff. And labor is the number one issue that you hear about. If you're not talking about COVID or cyber, which are the other two C's that show up, at labor. Here's the risk. If business can't find the talent that it needs and the labor that it needs, they do three things. They automate. That's going to happen anyways, but usually they automate and they train people to do something else we need them to do. Right? The second thing that they will do is outsource. They will just simply find somewhere else in the world that labor can be done, and that will just be accelerated, and that'll be an impact on our economy here and our ability to save for the kind of society we want, et cetera, et cetera. Or they will relocate. If the trend lines are such that I'm not going to be able to find the talent that I need here to build a successful business and to grow a successful business, these are the three options before them. So the urgency and the ambition with which we need to act on immigration is central to the quality of our life and the standard of living that we as Canadians want to enjoy. I've always said that there are three pillars to our economy: immigration, foreign investment, and trade. If you wobble the stool with any one of those three, it all falls apart. And immigration is the most emotional of those three. Investment shows up once in a while if you get some communist country investing or something, and trade, those days are gone now. Even labor movements support the trade agreements and stuff. But immigration is fragile. Immigration is something that's emotional to us. We need to work at it. And when I say us, I mean all of us. There's a sense that immigrants are all for immigration. Not necessarily. I'm here, close the door. I don't want anybody to compete now. So we've got to make sure that we maintain the support for immigration, not as a social policy, as much as an economic policy as well. And that's why I think it's so important the work the Century Initiative is doing, and we really appreciate the work that the Globe is doing to amplify attention to this issue.
I think it's really important that you framed it as an economic issue. And Goldie, just sticking with you, and then Mark will come to you after, the competition for talent is fierce. And especially for newcomer entrepreneurs. Goldie, what do you see that we need to do to ensure that we actually win that war for talent?
Yeah. A few things. First of all, don't dupe people into believing that they can come here and do what it is that they were trained to do in their home country if you're not going to let them do it. So either deal with that problem, which is a provincial and a professional bodies problem. We had in COVID a shortage of nurses, but the Nurses Association wouldn't let nurses be qualified to come in to help them. They complained about the hours that they work, but they won't let the nurses who are here, who are underutilized as nurses, be nurses. So if you want to really be honest with people, tell them that either your credentials don't fit and you're going to have to come in and do a bunch of things, but don't mislead them to suggest that we're qualifying you in our immigration process based on your ability to get a job and all that other stuff, and then bring you here and not have you do that. It's actually one of the reasons, and I'll give credit to the Brookfield Institute who pointed this out to me, but it's one of the reasons that many immigrants end up being entrepreneurs. because they weren't able to practice what it is that they were trained to do in terms of their education. So they become entrepreneurs, much like women become entrepreneurs because we never had childcare for the longest time. So we've got to make sure that we're honest with them about that. The second thing is, I can't tell you, pre-COVID, particularly the amount of travel that I did around the world, where we think that everybody's just dying to come to Canada. We sold ourselves on this idea that we're the greatest thing ever and they're all want into Canada. Actually, it turns out it's a really, really competitive landscape out there. And so what you don't know is, are you getting the best and the brightest, the ones most likely to contribute to your economy, the ones most likely to be successful, the ones most likely to be entrepreneurial or to grow a business and to contribute to our GDP? We don't know that. It's kind of like a successful drinking and driving campaign. You never know who you kept off the street. So how many people are looking at this country and saying, you know what I'm looking for? Is a government or governments with some semblance of a fiscal framework about how they're going to spend taxpayer money. Because I know if I'm coming to a country where there's runaway spending, I'm coming to a country that's going to increase my taxes, whether it's personal taxes or corporate taxes or otherwise. So people are much more sophisticated than we realize. Second thing they're looking for is, can they meet my talent requirements if I come here? If I'm coming here and I'm going to set up shop, am I going to be able to hire? Am I going to be able to grow? So these are just two small examples, and of course they're looking for the multicultural society and the diversity, inclusivity, and weather aside, most of the weather's not bad most of the year. People will manage all of that. It's competitive. That's the thing that I think we have to understand. It's not so easy to say, welcome to Canada. It's not that simple anymore.
All right, Mark, you got all fired up on our prep call when we were talking about this issue. What do you see as the call to action to make sure we win that war for talent?
Well, look, let's start with the good stuff, because there's a lot of good stuff here. We are one of the reasons that we, and it's about human capital. Okay, so one of the reasons that we ought to be good at human capital in this country is because we have a lot of experience at it. So we're multi-ethnic, we're multicultural, we're multilingual as a country. We've got a lot going for us, and probably more so than any developed country in the world. It may be fragile, but we have an openness as it relates to newcomers that's unlike anywhere else. It truly is unlike anywhere else. All of the three major political parties agree on our immigration policy by and large. I mean, that is tremendous. So we've got sort of social license for the policy. We have experience in terms of integration, and our sort of target numbers are pretty good. When I was on the Economic Growth Council led by Dominic Barton, who co-founded the Century Initiative, we suggested that we should go to about 1% of population as immigration target. We're there today. We're maybe even a little bit above that. So let's give ourselves some credit, and let's give the government some credit, because we're doing a lot of things right, and we have comparative advantage in the war for talent and in building our human capital resources as well as our physical capital resources. To me, a lot of it at this point is operationalization. How do we move quickly? How are we tactical? How are we nimble? How do we clear the waiting list? How do we set up those KPIs to actually bring people in? And as I wrote in the Globe this morning, let's take an example of the very horrific situation facing Ukraine and also facing Russians at this point of time. We should be tactical and moving so much faster to bring talent, both Ukrainian talent and Russian talent, those who want to leave the country because they don't support the current regime and would be interested in coming here. Other countries are hiring like crazy. Who are they hiring? Data scientists and AI specialists from those two countries. Like, they're out actively recruiting them. Where are we? Let's move quickly. Let's go to multinationals and say, many of whom are moving swaths of people out of those countries, accounting firms, consulting firms, global banks. Let's say, hey, why don't you move any of your staff that's in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus These are people working at professional services firms, by and large. Relocate them to Canada for as long as you want. We'll give them instantaneous visas. Let them pay taxes here. Let them stay for the duration of the conflict. Let them stay longer if they so choose. But where are we in terms of making those tactical moves before those countries that are competing with us for that talent do it first? And I can tell you, I was in the Middle East a couple of weeks ago, and they are hiring programmers out of Ukraine and Russia like crazy. And we should be doing the same. So to me, policy's good. Lots of policy, lots of announcements, and most of the policy's right. But what we really have to figure out is, how do we get stuff done? And that's easier than getting consensus on policy. So we've kind of done the hard part. Now we just have to challenge ourselves and measure ourselves on implementation.
There always seems to be an execution challenge here in Canada when it comes to policy. Okay, we only have 4 minutes left, but I do want to take at least one question from the audience, and I think that there's a gentleman at the back who has his hand up. Could somebody give him a mic? We just want to make sure that everybody can hear you.
We'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
I agree. I think everybody agrees from the strategic aspects. We're all there mentally, psychologically. We're all for it. Immigrants, bear with me. But the question arises, and you're right, we need to optimal operationalization or tactical execution. What's holding it back? Everything you said, we agree. I agree, at least. Thank you.
You didn't take government relations or government studies in university. This process is holding us back in part. I mean, look, we have an immigration system that was really brought together. And by the way, it's one of the strongest in terms of its integrity, one of the most rigorous immigration systems in the world. Problem is, it came from the 70s and the 80s, and we haven't modernized anything. Right? We haven't brought it up to speed. Believe it or not, there's still faxes going from embassy to embassy on some of these issues. I'm not making that up. And so we've got to modernize this, but we can do it. I think it just requires, the execution, as Rita said. The availability is there. We've got a lot of people, and some of these kids are like, "What's a fax machine?" I'll tell you later. Like we can do it. It just requires the ambition and the urgency with which to do it. We have the capacity today to take a lot of the public servants who aren't being fully utilized in the positions that they have as they're at home or whatever the case, move them into this department, get the backlog cleared up, start thinking about what we can do to do that. Countries are using apps and all kinds of things, and we're still making people fill out paper. So we've got to modernize the system, and it can be done. It requires leadership to do so. One other thing I just want to add on this, because we spent all our time on recruitment, bringing people here. I don't think we can lose sight of the importance of retention, that once they get here, that we keep them here. There was a study the other day that showed that 30% of young newcomers are thinking of leaving the country. Now, some of them say they have to leave to be able to afford a house when they come back here. And so we've got to address not just the economic issues, but also the social issues, right, around housing and childcare and infrastructure and so forth. So all of these things point to a vision for the country, the need for an economic growth strategy, a plan, because what got us here is not good enough to get us to where we need to go. So while we're talking about immigration, this is not a single issue. They're all connected. And I think this is where all of us can demand more from our governments to say, you know what, I'm tired of this Twitter politics. I'm tired of the long-term thinking being, what are you doing this weekend? I want to talk about the future of my country and what kind of a country we're leaving behind, the next generation, the generation that follows. This is a central piece of it, but it's one piece of it.
Gold, can I just add one thing?
Yes, of course.
Very, very, very quickly. I think the other part of it, and Goldie, I know you're going to agree with me on this, is...
I would never disagree with you, Mark.
Well, that's not fun.
No, I'm kidding. He knows I do.
This comes from a Calgary Flames fan.
Yeah.
The other part of it is we have to get government and the private sector working more closely together. And the mistrust that exists today between government, and it's not just the federal government, it's government at all levels, and the private sector. We've seen this in the response to the COVID crisis. We see it in other contexts, including energy, and we also see it here. Part of the answer here is a private sector answer. Let the private sector move to bring people in and facilitate them being able to do that. And a lot of the screening and other stuff that we do, frankly, is just bureaucracy. It's a waste of time. Let's let people in by and large, And if we have to do the screening ex post, that's fine. I can tell you, bad guys and bad women probably find their way into this country through means other than applying through permanent residency. Like, let's just face that, right? So we just need to sort of take this on as a challenge and a problem, have KPIs, and then partner with the private sector. I mean, look at this anachronistic way of these labor market opinions, those who've tried to hire somebody from outside the country to do a job in Canada. I mean, it's crazy. Guess what? A Canadian firm wants to hire somebody from outside the country. They've identified them, they interviewed them, they want to pay them, and that individual is going to be taxed in Canada. Approved. What's that? What's that mortgage ad? Approved, right? Like we should get those guys to be running our immigration system.
Okay, listen, I want to thank you both for your frank talk on this very important topic. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave our discussion there. And now I would like to hand off to my colleague, Chris Hene, to moderate the next discussion. So thank you both.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you all. That size up.
All right, thank you, Rita, and thanks everybody for that great panel. My name is Chris Hane. I'm the independent business reporter at the Globe and Mail. I'm excited to be here today to moderate a panel. We have an excellent group of entrepreneurs who are here to share their stories and their views about their journeys to Canada and how they grew their businesses. So I'll introduce our panelists. Joining me on stage is Murali Sreenaranadas. He's the executive chairman of 369 Global Inc. And as well, we have Gina Al-Katan, co-founder of Nuba. We can clap a little bit, it's okay. And we have two guests that are joining us virtually. So please welcome Carla Briones. She's an entrepreneur and business coach. And we have Zara Al-Harazi. She's the co-founder of Skillet. All right.
So we'll just jump right into it. So we're going to start by just going around to each of the panelists and just sort of briefly, you can share your stories of your journey to Canada and how you built your business. So why don't we start with you, Murali?
Sure, thanks, Chris. It's interesting. I was born in the UK, lived there till I was 7, and grew up from 7 to 21 in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which was very exciting. And then I had a great opportunity to start working overseas in India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and Europe, and France and the UK in the last couple of years. And I came back to Toronto in 2013, and Rania was talking about in Egypt seeing the telecom rise. It really helped me understand the value and excitement that's overseas, the innovation that's overseas. And I thought, what a missed opportunity, not for immigrants coming to Canada, but also for Canada, as they're not getting into the jobs that they deserve. So in 2014, I bought Computech College, and we've been serving new immigrants in Canada and helping them, guide them into wonderful job opportunities here in Toronto. We expanded into a creative agency and do a lot of corporate training through 369 Global.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm sure any Winnipeg viewers watching appreciate that you call it exciting. Gina, what about you?
Sure. So hello, everyone. My name is Gina Al-Katan. I'm the co-founder of Nuba. And I co-founded Nuba with my mom, who's here as well. And we make we make ready-to-drink hibiscus tea and other drinks from the Middle East. When we moved to Canada from Egypt, we brought hibiscus flowers with us. It's been a staple in our culture for thousands of years. So we created a modern brand to really bring a traditional superfood to Canada. We moved here in 2011. I went to school, and then after I graduated, I really started this journey with my mom. It's been an amazing journey, though very difficult. But fast forward a couple of years, we're in major grocery stores across Ontario, and we're recently on Dragon's Den, which is very exciting.
Yeah, and you got a deal.
We did, yeah.
Awesome, that's great. Okay, moving to our virtual guests. Why don't we go to Carla? You can tell us your story.
Hi, thanks everybody. My name is Carla Briones, and I'm originally from Mexico. I came to Canada with my parents when I was 18 in a U-Haul truck, so we made that big trek. And my dad, just like the previous conversation, he was a foreign trained doctor in veterinary medicine. And he came here under the assumption that he was able to practice, but he wasn't, unfortunately. And after many years, and I'm skipping a lot of hardship and your typical immigrant experience of selling gas and driving cabs, he finally was able to recertify and open his clinic. And through that process, I kind of got the bug as well. I went to school here. I was 18, so I was able to get at least the education here in Canada, and eventually opened my own businesses in the pet retail world. And when my dad ended up selling his business, we realized he made a huge mistake that cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix had he known what he should have known back in the day when he was setting up. And that was the moment when I realized that, how many other immigrants go through the same problems and same issues. And that's when I decided to open my own consulting firm to help newcomers open and scale businesses in a way that they don't have to go through the same issues that my dad went through. And that's what I do. I mean, I still have my businesses. I own a few franchises, Global Pet Foods, Freshie, but this consulting is truly what fills my heart and where I really truly see that I can have a contribution into the country that adopted me with open arms.
All right, thank you. And finally, Zara, if you could tell us about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zara Al-Harazi. I'm from Yemen. And my journey is a little bit different because I came as a 26-year-old adult with 3 children and only a high school degree, no higher education. And being a woman coming from the Middle East, you really don't think you have options. So I went back to school and I went to art school because I didn't think that I would really do well in anything else. The one edge that I had when I came to Canada was that when I was very young, I learned how to speak English from some Americans. So I didn't have much of an accent, but I didn't understand anything about the language or the nuances of culture. So I went back to school. I graduated from ACAD, and within 3 years, I started my first company, got Canadian Female Entrepreneur of the Year, among other awards, and sold that company, consulted for a few years, and then I am now in the process of starting Skillet. So yeah, that's me.
All right, thanks very much. So those are our 4 panelists. Now we're going to going around again. We've heard during some of these other panels about sort of broadly speaking some of the barriers and obstacles that people can find when they're coming to Canada and when they're trying to build their own businesses. But I'm hoping to maybe hear a bit more about some of your personal experiences. So Morale, first, what would be some of the major barriers or frustrations that your family found coming to Canada?
Yeah, I think for my parents, my father's a qualified engineer, my mom a nurse, and both of them had the same issues of where's your Canadian experience and qualifications, so that was extremely challenging. And I think more so, not in terms of economics, but more so in terms of their mental health and how my father could provide, et cetera. I think that's extremely challenging, and as the panel before was sharing with us, I think it's really important to set expectations and provide the right opportunities as immigrants come to Canada. My father ended up working overseas and to support us, and my mom raised us pretty much on her own. And I think the supports that we have in Canada really helped. People are friendly here and guided us through. I think that's one great thing about Canada. One of the many great things about Canada, I should say. But there's more to do. And Goldie Hyder mentioned about the credentials. I think that's a key factor. We have that need, especially in the healthcare space. Why not bring more people and give them those opportunities? So for me, it's in terms of my parents, it's been the credential side. In terms of a business owner myself, I think the opportunities that we have are tremendous. At 369 Global, we're a very diverse group and a group that has a lot of international experience. And in a place like Toronto, when you go into a boardroom, it's unlike any other place in the world. When you go to India, it's all, you know, people from relatively the same place, you know, fill in the blank country. But when you come to Toronto, the boardroom is so diverse. The perspectives are so diverse. If we can continue to leverage that strength in Canada, I think Canada sets itself as being a leader in the globe. All these issues that we're having, if we can take those perspectives and work them through in Toronto, we can show the world how we can do that. And I think those are the opportunities if we continue to do that in our corporations and organizations.
All right. And Gina, what about you?
Yes, I think when we first moved here, very similar story. So my mom has a PhD in agriculture, and she had a really hard time finding something within her field. And I think that's probably part of the reason why we started Nuba is because of those challenges that she had. I think I had a little bit of an easier time as I went to University of Toronto, so it was a little bit easier to get integrated within the school system, but we still found that starting a business, it was incredibly difficult because you didn't have that network. You didn't have the person that knew a friend of a friend, that knew somebody at a grocery store that could give us a chance. So we felt like we had to work twice as hard to get half as far. But I think the good part about being in Canada is people were really receptive and were willing to give you that shot when you did come across them, and also just that willingness to try new things, I think is part of the reason why we've been able to find success with Nuba.
All right. And moving to Carla.
Yeah, so very similar to the past two speakers. It was for my parents or for my dad, it was the credentials, obviously. It was the even though he owned his veterinary practice for 15 years prior to immigrating to Canada, it's very different. I mean, it's learning the new business environment, not having anybody to ask questions to. And again, this was quite a long time ago. And then, yeah, so not really having that network, not really having that know-how was very challenging for him. For myself, when I got into business, I also had the advantage of schooling here in Canada, my university. So I was able to adapt and to get assimilated faster than my parents. But I guess when I started in business, I think 13 years ago now, my challenge was, and it's less so now, but seeing other role models that look like me, that sound like me, that have similar history, and having that role model that if I can be it, if I can see it, I can be it. That's why, panels such as these ones are so important to kind of showcase other newcomers that, that they can too achieve their dreams of opening a business. And I didn't have that when I was just starting out. And I think not being to see yourself in other people that are successful can have an impact. So not having a role model and then not having access to a network that could, somebody who knows somebody who can introduce me to somebody, were definitely some of the biggest challenges that I faced. With my parents, it was an extra added layer of the revalidation of the credentials, and with them also access to credit. Just because the credit history didn't migrate with them. So there were several layers of difficulty, but here we are, and we're trying to make it work, and we're trying to open the road for those behind us as well.
And Zara.
Yeah, so my parents had different challenges. I sponsored them 10 years after I came. So my father was Deputy Minister of Planning for the government of Yemen. My mom worked for the United Nations Development Program, but they were retired when they came here. And so their challenges were a little different. And I'm not there in person because I'm in Calgary because my mom had knee replacement surgery. And I've just moved into the retirement home to help out. And boy, is that an exercise in humility. But I was talking to my dad yesterday because I anticipated this question, and his answer really broke my heart because he said to me 2 months after he got here, and I didn't know this until yesterday. He said 2 months after he got here, he got a speeding ticket. And there's no such thing as a speeding ticket in Yemen, right? So my dad got the speeding ticket, and my larger than life father said to me that he was so frightened when he saw his name on a piece of paper with the Calgary police on it. He thought he was going to be deported. And it just, it made me sad because those are little nuances that we don't understand to explain to newcomers. These small little things that happen. And every newcomer that comes here comes because this is a better life for them, a better opportunity, and they want to contribute. They want to be a participating member of society. They want to give all that they can, but they just don't know how sometimes, and they're afraid. On the good side, my dad also said to me, because he's had multiple health challenges with cancer over the years, and he said, if I was not here in this country, I would not be alive. And so, there's goods and and pluses and minuses, but it's just the little stuff that we don't always pay attention to when we focus on the big things that we should as well.
Well, I'd like to sort of ask about some of the themes that we're sort of seeing in common here. So I guess first of all, maybe we could talk a bit about networks, because I think that's something that's that's okay. That a few panelists have mentioned was kind of a challenge, was how to build those networks, how to build those relationships when you're starting, maybe starting from scratch in a new place. So maybe Murali, first, what are some sort of ideas you might have about trying to build those networks?
Sure. We talk a lot about networking, especially with our students at Computech College. It's the key. I think Rania was speaking about how this VP gave her the opportunity, right? You need to meet people. You need to get out there and show people what you can do. On the education side, I think that's important to have co-ops and these workshops, these networking events, hosting those. I think newcomer agencies can support with that as well, because it's not just about the resume. It's not just about, the long name. I mean, I have a pretty long name, as you saw. It's about meeting people face to face, connecting, and seeing the value, seeing the discussions, building that rapport. I think there's a lot of agencies in Canada that support that. It's just about getting out there, and we talk about empowering our students. That's the key, right? Reminding them as they are hearing, where's your Canadian experience, et cetera, reminding them of their value, and with that confidence going into these networking events.
Mm-hmm. Well, it occurs to me too when you're talking, what about the, we're talking a bit about what are the responsibilities that the entrepreneurs have, but maybe what would you say to people who are maybe in a position where they could be mentoring people, maybe people who already have established networks here? What should they be thinking about maybe when someone approaches them or before someone does?
I think the best thing to do is, again, I'm going to go back to Computech. One beautiful thing that we do is potlucks. And I think this is fantastic because everyone's food is kind of similar. There's a little unique spin to it. But as you break bread together, it builds relationships. But you understand that you have these slight differences that are unique, that are interesting, that are tasty, but we all have these common elements together. And so I think the best way to network is to have a meal together, and especially if you're trying something new together for the first time, it's this unique experience that bonds. That's really helped us at the college, and even when we do corporate trainings, we try to incorporate, Jamaican patties, mutton rolls, halo, like these unique items that people can talk about and then build rapport.
I want to go to one of your potlucks.
Yeah, yes, please. Everyone's welcome.
Gina, you talked a bit about how that was kind of a challenge for you when you're building your business, but it seems things seem to be going well so far. So how did you overcome that barrier?
Yes, I think there was a little bit of a cultural shift that we needed to get over of being too self-promoty. I think we really struggled at the beginning and like posting more on social media and doing these cold emails or cold calls or not being shy about putting yourself out there. In terms of reaching out for help or assistance or mentorship. I think as we went along, we got a little braver and started doing that a lot more, and it just grows from there. One person will introduce you to the next, but it was getting over that initial hurdle of sending that very first cold email that felt a little scary.
Was there maybe a first encounter that you had that might be a good a story you could share?
Oh gosh, I think my mom probably has the better story, but there was one of our very kind of early supporters when we moved to Canada. Her name was Donna Messer, and she liked to call herself the queen of networking. So she was really the first person that really taught us how to network in a Canadian way and what's appropriate, what are kind of the norms when you do want to network. So she was a great friend of my mom's, and I can't talk about networking on this panel without mentioning Donna Messer.
All right, thanks. And Carlo, I know you help coach a lot of entrepreneurs. What are some of the tips that you give them?
Yeah, so I do a lot of workshops with different not-for-profit organizations that train newcomers on how to open up businesses. And one of the workshops that I love teaching is the business networking workshop. And what I end up doing is everybody tells an immigrant, you know, you have to network, you have to network, you have to network, but they don't really tell you how or where. It's those two really key aspects of networking that you really need to develop, and that's where you really need to flex the muscle. So what I realized, and I actually asked my dad, is like, if somebody would have told you this at the beginning, what would you have liked to see? And he's like, well, first of all, I would have liked to be introduced to some people from, you know, key organizations, business organizations that I probably didn't know about, to kind of have that friendly face to the name of the organization, and then, kind of have some sort of, a friendly conversation with them, like break the ice, break the brick wall to enter those organizations and be able to network with them and then be introduced to other people, and then so on and so forth. And that's what I do with these workshops. I actually bring people from, one person from the Chamber of Commerce, another one from our local economic development agency, another person from a co-working space, all of these organizations that actually have networking events and have a community, and have them talk to the entrepreneurs and the newcomers about what they're offering, how the organization works, what they can do for them, and vice versa. And then all of a sudden they have that friendly face, and it's not as intimidating anymore. Because when you hear the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce or the Toronto Chamber of Commerce, it sounds a little bit intimidating. But if you know somebody already that already give you, kind of like a layman's term version of, what they do, and you have an email from them and they can start inviting you to those events, then you all of a sudden lower the barrier of entry for these newcomers, and they can start networking and they can start getting their feet wet. And actually the Fredericton Chamber of Commerce has a fantastic program in New Brunswick where they match successful local entrepreneurs with immigrant entrepreneurs that are just starting out. They match them, and it's almost like a mentorship program and like a shadowing program. So they get to expand their network. The mentor gets to mentor, they get to fill that bucket as well. And it's been such a successful program that I would love to see something like that instituted in all, chambers of commerce or boards of trades in Canada, because it's been so successful and it's been so mutually beneficial that it's a no-brainer for me. But just being able to lower the barrier of entry, I think that would be a step number one, and that's help for the students that I've taught.
Yeah, and you mentioned that mentors can get things out of these relationships as well. What are some of the benefits that some of the mentors have gotten?
Well, like newcomers, we're really smart people too. we can we can teach them one thing or two about managing your business, because a lot of the times many of these newcomers, they've had businesses in their countries, right? So they come with a completely unique way of running businesses. They come with a whole bunch of innovative ideas that there's a really cool give and take, right? About how to run businesses, how to train staff, some sort of innovation procedures, operational efficiencies that have happened because of that exchange of ideas. We just need we just need that extra chance, or we just need that lowering the barrier of entry, and we have a lot to contribute to this community.
All right, and Zara.
You know, I always tell anybody, whether you're an immigrant or not, is build your toolbox of knowledge. And I think that, we can talk about the skills gap in Canada and the world today. Well, newcomers have that skills gap times 10, especially when you talk about soft skills like communication and all the other things, leadership and all of that, and finding the empathy and courage and all those things. So which is why I'm building Skillet, because I realize that, we all need to build our skills. We all need to build our soft skills. But for a lot of us, it's easier to do it, and you can't actually learn those things from a book. So Skillet is live in person a place where you can go learn skills while you're having an experience, right? And we donate a skill to a young person who doesn't have access for everyone that we sell, and we're launching in September. But for me, it was building my toolbox. It was learning new things, going and taking a cooking class, because you're going to learn things from other people, going on a hike or an adventure, or things that we never do. As a kid in Yemen, wearing a burqa, we left Uganda after the war and went to Yemen as refugees. We left Yemen after the war and came to Canada as immigrants. And, I never had an opportunity to play a sport ever, or even run. And so, I went out and I seeked those opportunities because I learned from them. I met new people. I networked without networking officially. I just built my toolbox and my skills. And so that's what I tell people is just go out and do stuff. That's the best way to assimilate, to be a part of society, to contribute, and to learn.
I wondered if we could talk about funding a little bit, because I know that's when we were talking before, that can be a major barrier as well when you're starting. Gina, you and your mom bootstrapped your company. Could you tell us a bit about what that experience was like?
For sure. So I think we bootstrapped because we had no other choice. I think we were determined to bring this to life, and we're just going to do it in any way that we could. So you hear a lot about entrepreneurs will talk about their origin story, and they'll be like, oh, and then we raised a friends and family round of $500,000 or $200,000. And that was just not an option for us. We didn't have friends and family here that could give us that first check or that very first round. So it was a little bit of a double-edged sword. It kind of taught us to be really, really scrappy and resourceful and resilient. But it also meant that we had to work really, really hard and with not a lot of resources. So I think that's the case with many women founders, the case with many immigrant founders is that they bootstrap for much longer and have a significantly harder time raising rounds of funding. It wasn't even on our radar when we started that this was something that we could raise funding for. It was only till very much later they're like, wait, we can actually do this. But even then, when you say, okay, I'd like to start raising capital, there is no network that exists. Where would you even start? And I think that's been still is difficult for us till this day.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could open it up, whichever panelist would like to jump in here. But what are maybe some other solutions or ideas for making the funding a bit easier?
Actually, I'll jump in. Gina, well done. We are still bootstrapping our company as well because of a lack of funding for female entrepreneurs. And it really is a barrier. I have to tell you, when I first came to Canada, it blew my mind that there was a glass ceiling here. Because, coming from where I come from, I thought Canada was the land of opportunity and freedom and justice for all, and didn't matter what color, race, person you were, it didn't matter. And to find out that there were barriers was really quite shocking to me. And I had to reset my way of thinking. But, bootstrapping is not a bad idea. I just think that, you get it to a certain point where then you can ask for what you want, and you've already proven yourself to get the funding that you need. However, in Canada right now, there are tons of opportunities and funding for women, organizations like the 51 and others that are specifically for female entrepreneurs. So I really think the opportunity is there. You just have to dig and look for it and get a bit of traction before you actually approach those opportunities, so that you are a viable business when you do get funding, and then you don't have to give away too much of your company.
Yeah, what are some of the tips for getting ready for that funding?
Oh my gosh. I talk to everybody, honestly. Like I do not leave a stone unturned. I don't have a filter between my brain and my mouth. And I just network. I invite people for coffee. The great thing about Canada was, for a long time, especially with my first company, I was a nobody immigrant from nowhere. And I would cold call people and email them and ask them out for coffee because I wanted to learn how to buy out my business partner or do this or do this. And I have never had anybody say no to me. No matter how important or busy they were, they always gave me the time to just teach me that one thing that I was asking for. And I always say, I don't have one mentor, I have 1,000, one for every little different detail. I just seek out the best people. So I really think talk to people, because as you learn from them, they will also become your friends, your clients, your champions, and everything else.
Mm-hmm. And Carla, again, you work with a lot of new entrepreneurs. Are there some tips that you talk to them about in terms of finding funding or bootstrapping?
Yeah, so bootstrapping is what we do by nature, right? Because like Gina, a lot of us don't really realize that, getting funding and getting different rounds is even an opportunity or a possibility. So for myself is, just finding out what is available, finding out what are the different programs. The amazing thing about Canada is that Canada has so many programs and so much information that when you come from a country where you're not used to your government helping you that much, when you come to Canada, you don't even realize that all of these programs are available, that they're a possibility, and it almost sounds too good to be true. You're not even seeking them out because you don't even know they exist, because in your head it's like, it sounds too good to be true. So usually what I recommend to my clients is to go to the local, economic development agency and find out what is available and try to pick and choose what works for you. Try to network with other startups, with other founders, with other newcomer founders, because there's an added layer of understanding when you speak with an immigrant founder than with somebody who was born and raised in Canada. So try to seek those out. But it is also our responsibility to try to connect those newcomers that are arriving, that come with lots of innovative ideas and potential for opening businesses. It's also our responsibility, now that we kind of, we've walked the walk and we've gone through the trenches, is now it's our responsibility to help that next generation and start connecting them. So it's almost like a community effort, and try to do for others what we wish somebody would have done for us, because that's the only way that we're gonna turn the dial a little bit. But it's just, go to the local economic development agency and see what's available out there in terms of programs, networking and workshops. That's sort of like my number one thing for them. And then network.
If I could add something, Chris, I think it's quite unique in terms of the opportunities that technology provides, and specifically in terms of thinking about Web3 and this creator economy. So traditional businesses, we have to go for this traditional financing. But if there's a newcomer that comes into, is thinking about entrepreneurship or thinking about this space, a lot of the things that we're doing at Computech is we're training for these skills, how to present yourself on YouTube, video editing, these digital skills that are going to help. And there you can slowly build your, your business, your opportunity. And one of the unique things about Web3 is it's a creator economy. And it is these unique experiences that immigrants have, the storytelling, these unique creations that sell, that people are attracted to, right? Nobody really cares about the 11 millionth person that's going to see the Eiffel Tower. No offense to the Eiffel Tower, but the immigrant journey as an entrepreneur from Yemen, for example, and coming to Toronto and then starting a business, that is unique. And those stories, when you share that online, you get followers, and you can slowly build yourself. So I think this is very important for Canada as a nation to understand as well. How are we attracting the future of work, right? Not thinking about these traditional businesses, because traditional businesses, a lot of them are being disrupted. Right? So we need to position ourselves in terms of education, educational institutions, in terms of government, and in terms of corporations. I think one thing that Germany does very well is they've partnered with the automobile industry, and the automobile industry funds engineering undergrads. So there's free undergrad education for Germany. That really, I'm in the education space, that really attracts international students to go to Germany. How are we partnering in terms of government, in terms of private sector, and in terms of education, attracting these immigrants, right? I think Mark Wiseman brought that up. I think that's the key. We're in this together. This isn't just pointing the finger at government. We're all in this together.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think at this point, sorry, was there something?
I was just going to add to what Morali said, because I 1,000%. I always tell people, it's different is what makes you bring your unique self because that's wanted, desirable, different perspective, and it adds so much value.
All right. Well, I think at this point I'd like to open it up to the audience. We've covered a lot of topics. If there's any questions you have for our panelists about their experience or anything you'd like them to elaborate on. Any questions? Well, I'm going to have to come up with all the questions?
It's okay. We do have one from the virtual audience.
All right.
Employers will often mention that it's challenging to access internationally trained individuals. There's a disconnect. What do you think about the creation of a one-stop immigrant talent hub in communities across Canada?
Well, Morali, as you mentioned, you're in education. You want to start with this one?
I feel like that was one of my friends asking that question, but thank you, whoever that is. I think this is a unique opportunity, again, for Canada. It's partnering, right? In the education space, things are changing very rapidly. We think about these micro-credentials that the provincial government here in Ontario is supporting in terms of community colleges and private career colleges and universities. Fantastic. How do we think about that in terms of the work environment as well, right? People are going from contract to contract, project to project. It is the partnerships that we have with the corporate sector, partnerships that we have with government, and creating the space where newcomers can find a safe place to discuss these ideas, to network, that I think is going to be the key for Canada.
All right. Did any of the other panelists want to address the education question and credentials?
No, but I would add that,
I think Carla has something.
Yeah, sorry, I wouldn't add on the labor side of things, but I would do a copy paste on the entrepreneurship side of things too. So if there could be a one-stop shop where all newcomers could access information on how to properly open and scale businesses in Canada without having to open a gazillion tabs online, without having to make all of these calls and get lost in the rabbit hole, and be able to connect and interact with fellow immigrant entrepreneurs would be amazing. So yeah, so Marley, if you can create it on the labor, just do a copy paste for the entrepreneurship side.
Isn't that what you're doing, Carla?
Well, I'm trying to, but it's like a massive endeavor.
I follow Carla online, and she does some tremendous things. So Carla, you'll see some posts from me where we'll be working towards creating that kind of innovation hub within the 369 Global Group.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Did we have any other questions from the virtual audience?
Yeah, we do. Someone wants to know, Gina, what's next for your business?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think we're really riding the Dragon's Den wave right now. We're really looking to expand beyond Ontario, Canada-wide. We recently launched into Loblaws and superstores across Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic. So that's really exciting. But yeah, just want to get Nuba on and as many shelves as possible with mom. My mom is saying we're also going to be showcased at Whole Foods in May, so
Awesome.
Extra plug in there.
That's pretty. Actually, it makes me think too a bit of the connection there. I mean, you were talking about all of the creator economy, about this being an opportunity to bring individual stories, and clearly your product is filling a niche, a unique product that wasn't already out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the story, we found on our social media, and this is something that we stumbled upon when we first started, but the mother-daughter immigrant story really, really resonates with people. So we've leaned into that and leaned into what makes us unique. And it's done amazing on social media. We now have like TikTok followers that ask about my mom because she doesn't like being on camera, but we'll get questions about her. So I think just adding on to, I think what Zara said, it's really your unique story that is what pulls people in, regardless of whatever product service you're trying to do.
All right, leverage your parents if you can.
Yes.
Any other virtual questions?
I think that's it right now. Thanks.
All right. Great. Any last questions from the room about any of the experiences that the panelists had? Yep. All right, we'll bring a mic over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Trentafilido. I'm the Canada Excellence Researcher in Migration and Integration from Ryerson University. And I'm an immigrant, too. I've been here 3 years. Of course, a luxury one. I want to ask this panel is fantastic. And I want to say I was a little bit kind of surprised by the very much utilitaristic economic argument of the previous panel. I really like the very humane touch of all of you, both the online and those here. But I want to ask you, how do you explain that unfortunately what our research is showing is that people still face very important discrimination? We heard Rania earlier, and I have to say I don't think she's anymore here. I was very disappointed to hear that she took her husband's name to solve that. That should not be the answer, particularly for young women today. But how do you explain the discrimination of employers? I mean, I speak with people from banks and they say, oh, I have to tell my human resources or talent scouts, they should be looking out for more newcomers. Then I talk to newcomers from our research and they say all the stories that you said. How do we explain that discrimination persists? What is it? Like, I don't know, I don't want the researchers' answers, I want the person in the market's answer.
Great question. Lots to dig into there. We're almost out of time. Anyone have a really quick response to a very deep and thoughtful question?
Yeah. I think it's flipping. I think, in the past it was, where's your Canadian experience? But it's flipped where the person that is looking at this company is like, where's your diversity and inclusion in this organization? There is a huge demand for labor, and labor has the upper hand. So you get to pick and choose where you want to work with whatever name you decide to choose.
All right. Well, that's the end of our panel. Please join me in thanking Murali, Gina, Carla, and Zara. Thanks. We're now going to have our 15-minute networking break, so please come back in at 2:45 p.m. for the second half, our closing keynote and networking reception. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.